Okay, perfect. Okay, Carly. So I'm gonna hit start now, okay?
Amazing. Thanks, Michaela.
No worries at all. And I'm gonna hit mute as well. So just let me know if there's anything you need. Just send me a message. All right. Here we go.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, welcome. Welcome, everyone. Just wait as people join before we kick off. Thanks for joining us today. Just waiting as people join before we start our webinar.
Yeah, I still think we're quite early, aren't we, really?
Yeah, we'll just wait till a minute past 4 to give people a chance to join, get logged in.
Log in and no doubt update their Zoom.
Yeah, exactly. That always ends up happening.
Yeah.
Welcome. Just give it another minute there. So we see people coming in. It's great. Wait a few more moments, I think, for a few more of our participants or our audience to join, and then we'll kick off. Okay, I think we can make a start. So I'd like to welcome everyone and say thank you for joining us at our Design.Wisdom webinar today, which is part of the Royal College of Art's Helen Hamlin Center for Design's Design.Different series. My name is Carly Dickson. I'm a Knowledge Exchange Fellow at the Design Age Institute, and I'm delighted to be moderating the discussion today between Colum, Lowe and Dr. Dilip Jeste. Before we jump in, just a few housekeeping items. This webinar session will be recorded, and we'll be posting the recording on our website following the session. And we'll be taking questions from the audience via the Q&A box. So please feel free to type in questions there at any point throughout the session, and we'll take a look at those and we'll bring them into the discussion. So our mission at the Design Age Institute is to use design to help people have healthier and happier later lives. And that's why we're keen to explore if and how designing with wisdom in mind can help us better understand, value, and learn from older people in order to create more inclusive and desirable products, services, and environments. The Design Age Institute have hosted Wisdom Hour talks and wisdom workshops. And I'll just share a few posters from some of those, and led by our director, Colum Lowe, exploring this intersection of wisdom, design, and age. The questions we would ask in these sessions are ones we would encourage you in the audience to ask yourselves. Take a moment to think about who is wise in your life, and take a moment to think about what has been designed wisely around you, or perhaps an object that represents wisdom to you. And take a moment to think about if you feel like you've become a wiser consumer as you age, or a wiser citizen as you age. The Design Age Institute are keen to explore these questions, and that's why we're so excited to have Dilip with us today and to have learned about his research on wisdom, as it suggests that cultivating, respecting, and exchanging wisdom may not only benefit our health and happiness as individuals, but also collectively as a society. Studies by Dilip and his team have shown that wisdom is comprised of several components, from decisiveness, emotional regulation, self-reflection, pro-social behaviors such as empathy, compassion, and altruism, social advising such as giving rational and helpful advice to others, and acceptance of diverse perspectives and spirituality. Inclusive design, which places, just to go back one, inclusive design, we know it places acknowledging diversity and difference at the heart of the design process. So can we benefit from an awareness of the components of wisdom in order to foster wiser citizens, wiser designers, and a wiser society? So with that, it's a pleasure for me to introduce our speakers. Our very own director at the Design Age Institute, Colum Lowe. Colum is a senior design leader with a significant track record of developing inclusive products and services in the private, public, and charitable sectors. In 2020, Colum joined the Helen Hamlin Center for Design at the RCA as director of the Design Age Institute. Colum has been head of design at the Ministry of Justice, at Sainsbury's, Home Base, and the NHS National Patient Safety Agency, where he delivered a multi-partner program to advance the patient safety agenda. His experience includes running design firms Crabtree Hall, Calder-Moore, as well as his own consultancy in founding the independent safeguarding service, CIC. And our guest, Dr. Dilip Jeste, thank you for joining us bright and early from the West Coast of the US. Dilip is an award-winning doctor of medicine. He is director of the Global Research Network on Social Determinants of Mental Health. He's president-elect of the World Federation for Psychotherapy and editor-in-chief of the International Psychogeriatrics. He is former senior associate dean for healthy aging and senior care and distinguished professor of psychiatry and neurosciences at University of California, San Diego. He obtained his medical education in India, and in the US, he completed psychiatry residency at Cornell and neurology residency at George Washington University. He is a research fellow and later unit chief at the National Institute of Mental Health before joining UC San Diego, where he worked for 36 years. His main areas of research include schizophrenia, neuropsychiatric interventions, healthy aging, and wisdom. He was listed in the Best Doctors in America and in the Institute of Scientific Information list of the world's most cited authors. He is a past president of the American Psychiatric Association and American Association for Geriatric Psychiatry. He has an inspiring TED Talk, which we highly recommend, and he has published over 750 peer-reviewed journal articles in 15 books, including Wiser, which we also highly recommend for general audience, and it's a great read. So thank you so much to Dilip and Colum both for joining us today. And I'll kick off the discussion questions by returning back to these components of wisdom. And I'd love to set the scene about this intersection of wisdom, design, and aging by asking Dilip, what is wisdom and why are you interested in it?
Okay. Thank you, Carly, for a very kind introduction. And I want to thank Carly and Colum for inviting me to participate. I think the Design Age Institute is doing some remarkable and innovative work, and I'm just delighted to participate. So wisdom is an ancient concept. It goes back practically to the beginning of humanity. All the religions and all the philosophies in the world talk about wisdom. For example, there are 12 books of wisdom in the Bible, including the book of Job. And yet, wisdom was not considered a scientific entity until 1970s. Since then, so the research on wisdom has been growing. And I've been interested in wisdom now for the last 15, 20 years. So what is wisdom? How can we define it? Wisdom is a personality trait. That means it is characteristic pattern of behavior of an individual. You know, we know that some people are extroverts, some people are introverts. Some people are more resilient, more optimistic, pessimistic, so on and so forth. So wisdom is a trait like that. But it is different in the sense it has several different components, not just one or two, but 7 different components. And these include, so this is not in any specific order, but let's say decisiveness is one. Now, decisiveness doesn't mean you have to make spontaneous or quick decisions, not at all. It means you make rational decisions. That's the important part. Then emotional regulation. Think about a teenager whose emotions fluctuate hour to hour and minute to minute. And think about a wiser, older person who is more calm, controlled. So that is emotional regulation. But emotional regulation with positivity. You have some feeling of well-being throughout. Then comes self-reflection. When something goes wrong, it is easy to blame somebody else or something else. But self-reflection helps you find out whether it was something that we did wrong and that we can improve next time. So self-reflection. Pro-social behaviors is probably the single most important component of wisdom. Things that we do for other people. And as Carly mentioned earlier, so it includes empathy, compassion, and altruism. Empathy means sharing somebody's emotions. Compassion means acting on that and helping somebody. And altruism is going beyond that and helping others without any selfish interest at all in that. So there is pro-social behaviors. Then comes social advising. What good is wisdom if the wise person won't share their wisdom with other people? That doesn't mean you force your wisdom on others, but when other people ask you, I think you should help them. Then comes something that is sadly lacking in today's world, which is acceptance of diverse perspectives. The world has become very polarized in recent decades. So anybody who disagrees with us is either evil or dumb. And that's not wisdom. Wisdom is acceptance. Doesn't mean agreeing with other perspectives, but accepting the fact that people can have different perspectives. And lastly, spirituality. Spirituality is different from religiosity. You can be an atheist and still be spiritual. Spirituality means feeling connected with something or someone that you don't see, feel, or hear, whether you call it spirit or soul, consciousness, God, doesn't matter. So these are the components of wisdom. And not everybody is, actually most of us are not strong in all of the components or weak in all the components for that matter. We all have some strengths and some limitations. That is important to understand what are our strengths, what are our limitations, so we can help improve our own wisdom.
That's great. Thanks, Dilip. I'm going to just turn off the slides now to have the three of us full screen. And that is, I think, really great, setting the scene of wisdom. And I think to bring in the design component, Colum, I'd love to learn from you why you're interested in wisdom and how you see it relating to design.
It's worth starting by stating that we kind of spent 2.5 years thinking about what we now call wisdom before we met Dilip. And understood his thinking and the research into what he's doing. And there's a lot of consistency between our thinking and Dilip's, but I think we'd have to admit that Dilip is quite a stretch ahead of us. But as we all do, we stand on the shoulders of giants. Now I've read your book. I think I know as much about it as you do, Dilip, I'm afraid. That's the way the world goes, but clearly not. Where we got interested in it to start was on day one at the Design Age Institute, we all sat down and asked ourselves, what does aging mean? Because a personal thing, there's something that I didn't like through my career is this word of over 50s, over 60s, over 70s, retirees, pensioners. What do any of those words mean, and how do they define people? And of course they don't. There are many 80-year-olds running marathons and many 50-year-olds who can't. So this idea of aging, we struggled with, but we did start talking about life's transitions, that things that happen to you over your life at any age, they can happen to you at any age. Obviously, the older you are, potentially the more frail you might be, the less chance you have of having resilience and recovering from some of these things. But it was that horrible sort of kind of downward curve. And I used to tell a joke in workshops and places that, I used to be a very serious rugby player, but I've given up waiting for the call from Ireland. That isn't going to happen now. I think no matter how well I would play, I am not the sort of person I was when I was 27 physically. And it's just a very natural part of aging. But it did always seem to be this this negative curve, and this talk of burden and decline, and that seemed to be the public narrative. And it occurred to us quite quickly that something else does happen. What's the positive aspect of aging is that things do grow at the same time. What is it? What is a village elder? What is it to be older and perhaps wiser? Not necessarily wise, that's a different thing, but being wiser than you might have been when you were young. And so we started looking at that, thinking, right, here is a positive aspect of aging, that people have a lifetime's worth of knowledge and experience gained from living lives. Most people, reflect on it, learn lessons, and can pass on that knowledge to the children and grandchildren if asked. And we thought, yes, to counterbalance that those transitions of aging, this idea of wisdom, this idea of knowledge and experience was really powerful, and we wanted to understand it. And we were stunned, when we started looking, couldn't even find a definition of the word wisdom that people would agree on, never mind really good research, robust research that talked about a correlation between age and wisdom, until Carly, you came across Dilip, and we started reading your work, and it helped crystallize our thinking. And now the joke I like to tell at workshops is that, yes, we are living in a time of the oldest population the world has ever experienced, which means we're living in a time with the wisest population that the earth has ever experienced. And that's a positive thing to think about, to go with what many people say is a negative.
Yeah, I think tying that, the positive attributes of aging and becoming not only aware of them, but then designing for them is so key. And I think we've talked a lot, Colum and I, about this idea of wise consumers. And so we're curious, Dilip, how you see wisdom affecting our choices, and are we wiser consumers as we age?
Yes, that's just one comment before I want to start. What Colum said, which is very true, that the world is getting older. We all know the population. And there is so much ageism today that people call that silver tsunami, as if this is a disaster that is happening. That is so wrong. That is so wrong. The positive aspects, as Colum mentioned, are really important. I call it golden wave of increase in older people in the world. So your question, Carly, about does wisdom affect our choices? Answer is yes, absolutely yes. Now, when you talk about choice, that means making a decision, right? About choosing one thing over another. A wise person would actually use the different components of wisdom in making a decision. And we all do that in a way, automatically. For example, is the choice we are making only for our own purposes? Is it only for selfish reason? Or is it also helping the people we love? That is empathy, compassion, right? Another is emotional regulation. Are we making a choice because we are angry at something else, or we are just so happy that we'll accept anything? That doesn't help, right? Self-reflection. Just thinking about why we are making the choice, why it is good. And one thing to remember is that as you get older, you realize that no decision is good or bad. What looks like a good decision today may look terrible a week from now, and may look again great a month from now. So they say good is bad, is good is bad, is good is bad too. And so things change. And at a younger age, we don't realize that. At a younger age, the decision is so important because it's important for that moment. But really in the longer term, that could be a wrong decision. So knowing that really requires experience. And of course, the experience comes with age. Of course, if you use that properly. And one of the issues I find with many of the companies, especially technology companies in terms of design, is they make their design choices based on what younger people want, teenagers and younger adults. Because these are the people they think they buy their products, we'll go from iPhone 14 to iPhone 23, whatever, and so they choose the color, size, etc., everything that they want. I think that's really not appropriate because they need to also consider what middle-aged and older people want. Younger people's choices are often driven by peer pressure. So they go with what the social media say, what their friends say, rather than what they want. And for that reason, they change. The choices change. Whereas older people's choices tend to be more stable. There's another way of looking at it. Younger people's choices are often based on immediate materialistic needs. That is called hedonic. Hedonic is, there is something called hedonic treadmill. I want to make $1 million, then I'm happy. Then after that, I want to make 2 million, then I want 4 million, and so on and so forth. So I never stay happy because my needs increase, right? And that's what happens in youth. As you get older, you realize that those kind of hedonic things really don't last. So you develop something called eudaimonic well-being. EUDAIMONIC. Eudaimonic means focus on purpose in life or meaning in life. And the goal is to realize your potential. So older people make choices based on eudaimonic thinking, which is helpful to them as well as to other people. And that's why I think it is important that in designing, the companies need to focus not only on the younger people, but also equally importantly, or even more so, on what older people want. Because there's a large market there. The number of older people is increasing. They are going to buy product. They have money. And it's really important that the companies pay attention to their likes and dislikes.
Yeah, I think
so
I'll add to that. If anybody's heard us talk before, they'll know that we talk about the research in this area quite a lot, and that I think it's people over 55 will represent 63 pence in every pound spent by 2040 in the UK. So this idea that every person over a certain age is somehow impoverished and can't feed themselves is it's not true today, but it certainly won't be true going forward. But I like what you said, Dilip, about that. It reminds me of my own personal experiences, that sort of, almost every purchase decision is an overreaction to a previous purchase decision. I used to live in a small flat and it got so small, so I bought this huge house, in the suburbs. And after about 5 years, what am I doing with all these bedrooms that I don't need? But I was just overreacting to the fact that I'd run out of space in the small flat, and that now I've gone and bought a small cottage, and I'm wondering where I'm going to put all the furniture. So you kind of oscillate that good, bad, good, bad. They're neither good or bad decisions, but they're kind of that emotional overreaction to a previous decision. And another thing you mentioned, that I do like Charles Handy and a lot of his work and thinking, and he wrote a book on the concept of enough, how humans are not very good at understanding enough. We're brought up feast and famine, summer and winter. You have to harvest in the summer and you store it over the winter, and therefore we just keep collecting because we don't have a good idea of enough. We don't know when the next winter is going to come and how long it's going to be, and it's not very healthy. And it takes real wisdom, I think, to be able to understand that yourself and say no. But
and to think about, if once you start to learn better what you do want as we age, and how maybe on the design side, how, Colum, do you see designers better understanding and valuing that wise consumer quality, and how can that lead to better design?
Yeah, it is. We talk in the design industry a lot about empathy, and there's two sides to that discussion. I know there's a lot of things being written at the minute about, it's dangerous to be over-reliant on empathy in the design process, and I think that's right. But empathy is very much still a tool, in the toolkit of a designer, and you want to use it. And I think that wisdom is one of those things that it's difficult to have empathy with. It's difficult to say you're designing for somebody who is so much wiser than you. It is hard for a younger person to say, you don't understand this person, they are wiser than you because they've had 50 years. But it is true. Again, I think the average man at the minute, this is going to change a lot, but the average man at the minute in this country buys 9 pairs of jeans over their lifetime. I find that hard to believe. I'm sure I'd bought 9 at the time I was 25, but that's a bit of research that came out. But certainly the 9th pair of jeans were bought differently to the first pair of jeans, having done it 8 times before. You know, you learn through your purchase decisions, and you learn, you know, what brand, quality, color, wash, shrink, not shrink, skinny, baggy, pockets. You know, you learn what you want, what suits you, and what you're comfortable with. And whether we're talking about jeans or cars or houses or medicine or foodstuffs or any kind of health benefiting activities, not to understand that thought process, that self-reflection, those pro-social kind of decision making, means you are likely to either design the wrong product or market it incorrectly at the person you want to buy it, and therefore it won't succeed. And that's not just industry, that is also public sector, that's, you know, local authorities trying to get people to adopt care services or avoid care services or eat better or exercise more, whatever it might be. I think if you get the product wrong, or you get the marketing, the communications of it wrong, the likelihood is that it will fail. And all we're trying to do is understand your customer, understand what motivates them, understand how they're going to evaluate the pros and cons of your product and service, and designed around those needs and that decision-making process. And you will have, there's no guarantees, but you will have a better likelihood of success.
Yeah. It seems like, you know, there's the designing with wisdom in mind for the wise consumer, for the individual, which seems that there's clear benefits from thinking more about that in the process, in the design process. And then there's also how we can design more broadly for the exchange of wisdom within society too. My background's in architecture, so I'm always thinking about how the spaces are helping us connect, or if they're not. And I think that idea of wisdom exchange, Dilip, how important is that exchange of wisdom for a community?
I think it is very important. There is no question about that. That the exchange of information, as I said, one of the components of wisdom is wise advising. And again, that means communication with others. Also, until now, so last time I talked about how younger people's needs differ from older people's. And that actually doesn't mean that we should choose one versus another. That's wrong. It's a question of how we bring both of them together. And as a geriatric psychiatrist, one thing I've learned is that the best thing we can do is to have more intergenerational activities. Bringing younger and older people together is critical for design purposes and for various other purposes. Colum was earlier talking about what is old age, and how do you define aging? So typically we think about aging as something that begins at age 60 or 65. That's so wrong. Aging begins at conception. You know, I mean, there is even a baby, a 1-year-old baby is older than a 1-month-old baby. And there are changes that occur in the brain and body throughout the life. And we sort of think about children as a period of growth and development, and old age as a period of degeneration. That's wrong. There is degeneration that occurs in children, and there is growth and development that occurs in older people also. So we really need to think about how to bring them together. And intergenerational activities are really important. So some years ago, we worked with the School of Engineering, and we had 2 or 3 engineering students team up with 4 or 5 seniors who lived in a retirement community. And they had to agree to spend about 2 hours a week for 1 full year. And during that time, they had to develop some new product that was helpful to meet some unmet needs of the older people. And so they formed these teams. We had about 10 different teams, and they worked on different aspects. And at the end, there was a competition, and then people voted which was the best one, it really was so helpful because they developed product. Like one product was older people tend to fall at bedtime when they want to go to the bathroom. There is no light. They can't switch on the light because they wake up. So they developed something called lighting carpet. You step a foot on the carpet, only that part lights up, so on and so forth. It's just an example of how intergenerational activity generated innovative products, and older people were co-inventors along with the younger ones. At the end of that year, the younger people really appreciated how wise and helpful the older people were. The older people appreciated how smart the younger kids were. They come up so creative. And I think that is something that really needs to be taken into account in designing, that it really needs to take into account these diverse needs of different populations. Then it will really have much longer lasting value.
Yeah,
I think I agree with that, and I'm going to get my childhood Marxism wrong here now, but I'm sure that Karl Marx wrote about this idea of the production consumption model, and that if people are removed from the production of goods, they therefore can't consume the goods that are produced because they have no income or they've no means to. And therefore, you create this two-tier society, those who produce and those who can't. And I think Marx is writing it about women, and that was the first start of the feminism and communism, this idea that women have to be involved in the production of goods to be involved in the consumption of goods. But it's the same with older people. If you remove them from society, if you drop them into a care home and drop that into a field somewhere, and you start removing them from your communities and your societies, then you're othering them. You're removing them from the production, you're removing them from society and the contribution they can make to society. You other them, and then it becomes a them and us. And it's one of the most ridiculous things that we see, this idea of them when you're talking about older people. It's all us. We're all getting older. If we're lucky, we're all going to be old. It is going to happen to us, and therefore, the duty is on you to try to change it and to integrate, people of all ages into a single society and look for their own individual benefits. I think that's what's one. Actually, Dilip, I'd like you to ask you. I don't know if that's a future question, but you in your book you do talk about the difference between kind of social wisdom and practical wisdom, which I found very interesting. This idea that, it's wisdom as a spectrum, if you like, that there's different types to it. I never really quite got whether social wisdom is designing, understanding human nature or designing, understanding society. Maybe you could.
No, thank you. We all talk about the personality traits and individual characteristics, but some of these concepts really affect the society. If you look at last 30 years or so, 25, 30 years, overall, the things have gotten worse. The things have gotten better in several ways. The two main things are globalization and rapid rise of technology. Both of these things have been terrific in so many advantages. They also have downsides. And the downside is exemplified. The number of suicides has increased something like 33% in the US and many other countries. Deaths from opioid abuse have increased tenfold in the last 20 years. The average lifespan in the US fell before COVID. That was because of loneliness and other related things that made life harder. And who are suffering most? Younger people. Younger people, they are good at technology. They're so good at transportation and global using. On the other hand, the competition has increased. The peer pressure has increased. Social media have made life much harder. So what is happening? The social wisdom really has changed in the last 25, 30 years. And there are Gallup polls that show that the level of anger, depression, anxiety, even hatred has increased by something like 25 to 30% in the last 15 years. So that is something where we need to think about the societal wisdom. People have become much more polarized, as I said, much more nationalistic, and within that, again, their own small group, they are favoring. And there is much less acceptance of diversity of perspective. So if you look at just the components of wisdom, as I said, empathy, compassion, self-reflection, emotional regulation with positivity, diversity of perspective, they are really going down. And that's where we need to think about what can we do, not only at personal level, but at the societal level. We need to do that for the human species survival and thriving, right? And so what is needed is doing things at the educational level, healthcare level. We should not focus, and this will also apply to design in the sense, not focus strictly on the materialistic things, but also on meaningful thing, meaningful life, realization of people, life's potential. bringing diversity together, diversity in so many different ways, age, of course, but also race, nationality, sex, and so many other things, right? I think that kind of bringing integration and also focusing on rewarding things like empathy, compassion. Right now, we reward only the one who makes most money, one who sells most products. We should also actually importantly reward things that help others. So now it is like in sports, only the person who wins all the matches or the team that wins all the matches succeed. What about sportsmanship? And again, something for design to think about how can we promote that. I think that will be really very helpful for increasing societal wisdom.
Yeah, those are such key points. Colum, did you have any thoughts on how design might do that?
Yeah, well, I think what sparks a little bit of thinking about the work that you're doing, actually, Carly, the bit on spending with age and heart changes. This idea that, well, it's not idea. The research would say that as you age, you do tend to spend less money, and one of the reasons for that is you literally have one of everything. You know, you get to a certain point, and I've got a toaster, I've got a microwave, I've got a sofa, I've got a carpet, I've got a bed, I've got a house, I've got suits, I've got clothes, I've got one of everything. So if you want to sell me a toaster, you've got to give me a very good reason to throw my existing toaster that's working perfectly well in the bin. And that idea of pro-social behavior would say to me, I'm much less likely to do that for environmental reasons. And older people, you know, are more environmentally aware and more likely to boycott companies for environmental reasons. So you're fighting against that. And so it isn't just, here's another pair of jeans or here's another toaster, you know, older people are not buying it. They mustn't have any money. Not true. It's just that they're using their wisdom to say, I don't need any more stuff. So what I want to buy with that money, I want to buy experiences. I want to buy joy. I want to buy holidays and meals out and trips. I want to spend time with friends and family. That's what people are buying, unless their toaster breaks, of course. And then you have that opportunity to probably fix it rather than replace it. You know, but that's where the money and the investment is going, because people as they get older, understand where value comes to them personally more clearly than maybe when you're younger.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And just to expand on that, the experiences point in particular that Colin mentioned was from a report that we looked at with the International Longevity Center. And it was that older people in the report who were surveyed really did want to spend a lot of their time and money on experiences, but there was often design that was disabling them from doing that. It was creating barriers to them being able to access the experiences that they wanted to enjoy. So to us, that was a recommendation that if places become designed to enable people to get there and do what they want to do, that's a really key way design can help us connect and experience things together. And I think one of the ways that we're keen on wisdom tying in with that idea of connection and enabling intergenerational exchange is that you're finding, Dilip, from your book about the wiser we are, the less lonely we are. And I'd love to hear you tell us a bit more about that relationship between wisdom and loneliness.
Yeah, sure. So loneliness is defined as subjective distress due to feeling alone. It is not same as isolation. For example, a college student who lives in a dorm, right? There are 100 other students. And also he has 500 Facebook friends, lots of social connections. But that college student may feel very lonely because he doesn't have quality relationship. On the other hand, an older person who may be living by themselves or with their spouse or partner, they don't have too many friends, too many people. They don't use social media. They may not feel lonely because the quality of relationship is very good. And so it is important to keep in mind that loneliness is different from social isolation. Social media actually cause more loneliness and suicides and so on. As we know, it is a problem. And loneliness is a major problem from a health perspective. Numerous studies have shown that loneliness increases the risk of diabetes, obesity, heart disease, and it shortens the lifespan. It's difficult to believe, but loneliness is really one of the worst things that can happen. And to some extent, we have control over it, right? I mean, if we improve the quality of social connection, that can go down. And one of the most interesting findings we have was this inverse relationship between wisdom and loneliness. People who score high on wisdom, they're not likely to be lonely, and vice versa. And why? Just look at the components of wisdom. The first is empathy and compassion. And by the way, that also includes self-compassion, right? So if I'm compassionate toward other people and also compassionate to myself, I'm less likely to feel lonely, right? Similarly, emotional regulation. If I don't get angry or happy or, suddenly moment to moment, it changes. If I'm more calm, controlled, then I'm less likely to be lonely. Spirituality, of course, is one example where you always feel connected with something, someone. So you're never lonely, even if you're alone. So a person in a cave may not feel lonely, whereas a person surrounded by 100. So wisdom really is a good antidote or vaccine for loneliness. And it's something that needs to be practiced. I think that's, so we have some intervention that we have done that really show that fact. But again, this is something design can help in terms of reducing the loneliness and promoting these wisdom-related qualities.
Yeah, I think that's really important. It's obviously at the Design Age Institute is something we look at a lot, this idea of loneliness, but also social isolation, because if you're socially isolated and you fall and break a hip or get trapped in the bath, there's problems there. If there's nobody you can call, if nobody's coming knocking, but loneliness certainly, the way society has changed, we used to have the church and the pub, and we used to go to work locally and sit on the bus and meet people at the same time on the same bus, the same seats every day, and go to the shops and stand in queues, and all that's just kind of gone. It's been changed and replaced with other forms of working and socializing and a lot of digital. So all those informal, natural ways that you had of meeting people in your neighborhood are kind of disappearing. They're starting to grow up with some digital apps. We have a WhatsApp group on my street, and everybody does kind of chat, and street party once a year, and it's not fantastic, but it's better than not doing it. But it is a problem, and I know this is a bit of a cliche, but this idea that you suddenly hit the age of 75 and you're lonely, so we'll drag you down to the church hall and you can do some ballroom dancing and have some warm tea and a soggy sandwich, and that's you sorted. That just isn't going to hack it. It's not what people want. It's, I didn't do any ballroom dancing when I was younger. Why would I want to do it now? And as Carly was saying, I think once you've hit the age of 65, the average household in the UK, the average couple still have £400,000 left to spend in what's left of their life, and they've earmarked 1/4 of that simply for having fun. So they're going to that. So they're absolutely 1/4 of all their expenditures are going to go in having fun, and your job is to find out what that means for them. not necessarily ballroom dancing and drinking tea in a church hall, but what is fun to people. What is a lifetime of watching football or whatever it might be? What is that? What can you leverage to continue giving people fun where they can meet other people in their neighborhood and their locale? And that is a big design challenge, and it's very hard to solve if you don't have empathy with older adults or the aging process or the wisdom that comes with all that knowledge and experience with aging. When we talk about wisdom, when we talked about it before we met you, Dilip, we talk a lot about, inputs, outputs, and black box, and the kind of the inputs is all that knowledge and experience and study, that's kind of the input to the human. And if you've never been lonely, it is one of those things. Well, actually, I've never been lonely. How do I get myself out of this? It's never happened to me. I don't have anything to call back on and go, when I moved jobs to Washington, here's what I did. A lot of people have never been lonely. They've been in a solid relationship most of their lives, and their kids have come visited, and they've had their brothers or their parents. And slowly, that's one of the problems with aging. Those are slowly torn away from you. Even family now, move away for work and partners or whatever. And suddenly you're left having to face something that you've never faced before at the age of 75 or 80. And we get it's tough. and if anybody's got any answers in that space, drop me an email. But
yeah, I think that it's coming back to those third spaces and designing those places where people can gather to exchange wisdom based on things that feel purposeful. Because I think that's something we've talked about often, Colum, as well, is that it's not about common age, it's about common interests. And that can help bridge the generational divides as well. And we've had a couple of questions come in from the audience that I thought this one might make sense to tie in now. Thank you for the question. It's from Anonymous, but I'll read it out. It's, in addition to designing for wisdom or consumers who are wiser, what does it mean for a designer to be wise? What is wise designing? Colum, did you want to take that one first?
Thank you. Well, I think it means exactly the same thing. Dilip has these 7 measures, the San Diego scale, those 7 measures of wisdom. And I think, if you think long and hard about them all and what they all mean for the process you're going through, you will design better products and services and understand, what is pro-social. If you're designing a shop, for example, what does pro-social mean? It means designing to be inclusive, designing to let anybody in, designing with environmentally responsible material that's not going to destroy the planet for future generations. It kind of means lots of things. And if you really study them all, I think it will make you a more rounded designer. But the best way to design wiser is to meet your customers and understand their wisdom and design for them, as always, but not just design. That's what kind of ethnographic research has a limit. You can watch somebody and design around what you see them doing, but you can't understand their thought processes by doing that. And that's where this new type of interviews and really understanding why some things are never tried or because they have been before and some things will be. But it's a very new field, as Dilip would tell us, so maybe I don't have all that many answers.
Well, that's a really good start, I think. Dilip, did you have any thoughts on that question from your perspective about what is wise designing?
I think Colum really explained it very well. I mean, it is just look at the principles of that, and I really think they would apply to older people. One thing both Carly and Colum had mentioned was that older people have money, but they don't spend as much as they used to. And what we found out actually in our studies was that, yes, older people, they want to leave a legacy for themselves. And that is what they're thinking about. So we interviewed some older people who were really close to passing, and they were looking for ways in which their legacy can continue. And they're ready to, so whatever money they have left, and they have often large savings, they can invest in something if they meet the right person, somebody who takes into account what they want. And that's where, in a way, the white designer would come into play, that instead of sort of generalizing, just talking to individual folks, and again, of course, there will be groups of people like that. What do they want? I think what we do currently, especially technology companies, that things are other products, we try to sell them based on what younger people want or some traditional. Instead of that, we need to focus on what specific people want in terms of what their legacy will be after their death. Not what they want today. They are often not focused on, they don't want to spend money on buying something expensive today. They want to do something that will keep their legacy after their passing.
That's a really good point. And that our partners at International Longevity Center found this that is a key thing as well. There's a few questions that have come in on the tech side of things in particular. And this one from Harith Al-Saidi, thank you for the question. With AI revolution, how could wisdom do with the infinity solutions to make a design concept in every step to execute any design with unbelievable treatments that could never have been imagined otherwise?
Yeah,
so, Colum, do you want to take that one?
I read that, actually just kind of melted my brain a little bit thinking about it. But I think, again, Dilip in his book, but we already talked about this as well, this idea of, what's the difference between artificial intelligence and artificial wisdom? When we start getting artificial wisdom, which can't be far away, really, we might think it's impossible, but we thought artificial intelligence was impossible, but it's certainly not. it's going to change everything again. Everything changes again, and we will have to adapt, and we'll have to learn how to use these things like AI, like Chat GPT. You try to stay up to date, you try to learn, and you try to stay with the technology, and it has huge potential to do good. I mean, absolutely could revolutionize all sorts of care. And the idea that an AI can't keep you company, I would disagree with. I think it can. People put their radios on to keep them company, and their televisions on to keep them company. And people say it works. So why would an AI not be able to provide some element of company and be able to sort of answer some questions for you, like how do I work this remote control for my television? I think that's the sort of question I'd like to ask an AI, how things work. But if we're talking particularly about things like medical treatments and drug design and etc., well, I mean, one is guessing all those things are going to accelerate massively in the next 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I mean, I really think there is something called artificial wisdom, and we almost don't have a choice. I do see that AI. So what do we mean by artificial wisdom? Robots that are compassionate. Now, can a robot be compassionate? Of course, we teach our kids how to be compassionate, and we can teach a machine how to be compassionate, accepting diverse perspectives. Can we teach the machine? Yes, we can teach the machine. Because machines learn from the experience, right? That is how they improve, help to individual people. But what that needs is collaboration between the computer experts, AI experts, ethicists, as well as people who do neuroscience. And that kind of partnership, I think, is essential for developing future robots. And that will apply to all the different fields, including design, where the goal is to come up with products that are not just intelligent products, but that also take into account compassion, diversity of perspectives. And I really think that is not only possible, but I think that is essential. And I usually like to take an optimistic view of the world. And I think that's going to happen. If not in 10 years, then 12 years, 15 years. But I think it will be there. And then all this fear right now about AI may not be necessary if we can make the AI more compassionate and useful, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And along that line, I think in terms of compassion within a sense of community, we have a question from Sarah Kahn that she suggests a sense of community seems like a useful place to harness the power of collective wisdom from. And she asks, could social prescribing through local design initiatives be a way forward to develop this?
I'm speaking first. I'll let Dilip have a look at that one. So I can say I agree with Dilip.
So social prescribing, I don't know what actually it's something that is becoming popular in healthcare, especially in the UK. That's one of the pillars of healthcare. And what it means is referring to what are called social link workers. So they can be social workers, they can be local agencies, government agencies or private foundations, whatever it is, where they work with the person, the consumer or client, find out what their personal needs are and how they can be met. Not necessarily healthcare needs, financial needs, whatever it is. For example, sometimes patients have difficulty, they don't have transportation to go to the ER or clinic. This is not something they're going to tell their physician or anybody else, but that is very important. That will actually affect their health, right? So that's an example of how people can help. This social link workers can help somebody in meeting the needs that they don't talk about. And that's where actually I really think the design can be helped by finding out what are their needs, unmet needs that they don't articulate, because nobody asks about those specifically, but they matter a lot to them. Yeah. So what matters to a person is more important than what we think is important for them.
Yeah, we know ourselves best. Colum, did you have thoughts on that as well?
Here's where I get to say I agree entirely with Dilip. I'm really excited about the idea of social prescribing. I'd like to see, we'd all like to see it rolled out further and broader, and take more on, because it is almost like social prescribing is wise. It's compassionate. It's empathic. It is looking at how somebody lives their life and how they think, and feeding something into that system that's going to make a difference, and therefore it's more likely to work. And creating societies and social prescribing in societies to helping societies come together is hugely important. Will save, healthcare and people lots of time and money, but more importantly, the breakdown of society, the segmentation of it into lots of different, little layers, would be absolutely disastrous for us, as people living in systems and organisms. It just doesn't work. It creates them and us. It creates mistrust. The newspapers at the minute seem to be trying to create this gender war between young generations and older generations, where one doesn't exist. But if you keep putting it in the newspaper, it soon will. If you keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it, it soon will. And that's why we're getting the them and us. But yes, I think social prescribing is it could be totally revolutionary if embraced fully. And we can get ways to work it. So I'd love, anybody wants to work on that, we'd love to work with somebody on that and understanding how that works in particular areas and particular groups of people.
Yeah, thanks, Colum. And I think in terms of continuing on this discussion of what can we, really help us design a more inclusive world, is there anything that we haven't yet brought up to do with wisdom that you think could help us get towards that?
No, I think most things were discussed. I mean, one thing that struck me, again, I'm not a design person, but when I was reading about design principles, I found several commonalities between the recommended design principles and parts of wisdom. And I thought that is wonderful. It is really great that the principles that are recommended, including, for example, balance, and taking into account both the short-term needs and the longer-term needs, and purpose for that product, and so on. So I really think the field of design is, I think, way ahead of many others in terms of incorporating wisdom in their principles.
Yeah, and Colum, from your perspective, is there things that you'd like to add, what the designers can do or can think about to create this wiser world that we're discussing?
Yeah, the one thing that we haven't talked too much about, which we do in our sort of wisdom workshops that we run from time to time, is talk about how does one learn to be wiser? Can you become wiser, or is it a fixed point? We're told that intelligence is kind of fixed, and I think, from well, we've always suspected you can, but Dilip's work certainly suggested that, of course, you become wise as your age. Part of it is as a natural consequence of building up knowledge and experience, but some of it just comes from exercising your empathic muscles, your compassionate muscles, understanding what is wise, and just teaching yourself to be more, pro-social, to be more decisive, making good decisions at the right time. All those things, they can be learned, they can be practiced, and they can be improved. And I think, harking back to an earlier question, it's hard to be a good designer if you're not a wise designer. I think the two things, they're just linked. If you're designing for other people, you end up having to understand other people, and therefore you're kind of doubling the speed at which you're developing knowledges and experiences, and testing those muscles that make wiser people.
So true. We have a question from Yolanda de la Fuente. Thank you for the question. And it's kind of looking at how we can design a new life plan. So they're suggesting that is a way to find answers for successful aging a gerontological, pedagogical education? Is it designing a new life plan? What do we think about how we can look at a life course approach that takes these things into account?
Well, obviously, I'm going to take a design approach in that one. And a pedagogical approach is not necessarily different from a design approach, it has to be said. But this idea, successful aging is one of those questions that you have to start with by asking yourself. And yeah, I think in Dilip's book that I read, I've said that too much in this last hour, but you wrote something that I just stopped me dead. And it was a question. You said, ask yourself, who are you? And I don't think I've ever asked that question to myself. Who am I? You know, and I think that's an important part of wisdom. It's an important part of the answer to successful aging. Is like, who am I? What sort of older person do I want to be? And therefore, and then look at the gap analysis and go, what do I, between now and then, what do I need to do to become the person I want to be as I age? But that question, starting with, who am I? Because we all have masks and we all portray things about ourselves that are not necessarily entirely accurate. So remove your mask and ask yourself, who are you? I think that's really, really powerful. And it stopped me in my tracks. It sounds silly now, I'm saying it out loud, but it stopped me in my tracks and made me think.
I agree with that 100%. I think who defines successful aging? Actually, each person defines successful aging for themselves. Traditionally in medicine, the successful aging or healthy aging meant that you are physically perfect. That's wrong. An 80-year-old in a wheelchair can be very happy and feel that they are successfully leading their life. If their goal is not just physical health, but really they're achieving their potential. And there are actually people who, for example, Franklin Roosevelt, he was in a wheelchair most of his adult life because he had polio in his early 30s. So how can a person in a wheelchair be president of a country, especially during Second World War and so on? And yet he was one of the most successful leaders in the world. And that's something that successful aging should be defined by the individual themselves. And then others should help the person to achieve that.
Really appreciate these responses, and I really appreciate both of you taking the time to speak about these topics, and to the audience for sharing great questions. We'll follow up with the audience with some links to wisdom workshops and other areas that we'll be looking at continuing these conversations in the future, but really glad that we got to talk about the ways that we as individuals and as a society can better understand wisdom to become more inclusive altogether. So we really appreciate your time today. Thank you, Dilip, and thank you, Colum, and thanks to everyone here listening.
Super. Thank you. Thank you, Carly. Thank you, Dilip.
Thank you. Really enjoyed this.
Thanks very much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.